Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now it is, in case you hadn't noticed it, the summer, and for hundreds of thousands that means a trip to a music festival. Along with beer and bands, illegal substances also feature for many gig-goers. Now the Boomtown Fair in Hampshire has become one of the first festivals to offer on-site drug testing. But with drug deaths at a record high, is this a pragmatic solution, prioritising safety over the law, or effectively condoning illegal drug use? Anya Pop spent the weekend at the festival seeing the scheme in action.
It's festival season, and for many Brits, that means one thing: party time. Over the weekend, a mishmash of old-school ravers and glitter-encrusted 20-somethings got lost for 3 days in the surreal and bizarre world of Boomtown Fair, where anything goes and normality is a distant concept. And down this hill, the escape from reality continues, because in that tent down there, they're doing drug testing. And we're not talking the testing of drugs that have been confiscated by the police, but festival goers, with the acceptance of the police and festival organisers, can take the drugs that they've smuggled in to get them tested to find out if they are what they think they are. It's one of 4 UK festivals this year where The Loop, a not-for-profit drug testing service, is setting up stall in a break from the usual "it doesn't happen here" attitude. So Henry, tell me what happens. People come in here with their drugs.
So they'll come in here and they'll come to our sample drop desk first. So here we will give them a little bag and they can put a sample of what they have in here. So either a little scoop of white powder, or either a bit of a pill, or ideally a whole pill. If they give us a whole pill, then we can test how strong it is. If they only give us a bit, then we can't do that.
And how often is what you test what the person thinks it was?
And we find all sorts of missold drugs. So we've had paracetamol, we've had sugar being sold as ketamine, we've had anti-malarial drugs, we've had pills made of 100% concrete, we've had plaster of Paris. Yeah, all sorts of things that you wouldn't really want to be putting inside yourself.
After 20 minutes filming in their makeshift lab, they find what they think is crushed up anti-malarial tablets masquerading as the Class A drug ketamine, and a menacing adaptation of the former legal high, now Class B drug mephedrone.
When mephedrone was banned, Chinese chemists experimented and came up with something that would circumvent the legality of mephedrone. 4-chloroethcathinone is an even more toxic, even more dangerous version of mephedrone, and in this case it's been cut with caffeine, which would make it substantially more dangerous for the user.
What would happen if they took that drug?
It's hard to say exactly. It would depend on their medical history. For example, if they had existing heart problems, they would almost certainly end up in hospital.
Drug-induced deaths in the UK are 3 times higher than that on the continent, so some say the service has never been more needed. But not everyone is convinced. There are some people that will say that offering a service like this legitimises drug taking. What would you say to that?
Well, we're very clear that we're not encouraging or condoning drug use. And in fact, our initial results suggest that when people see us, actually they go out and either take less of the drugs, or for a small number, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 10, they ask us to dispose of their drugs, so that we're taking drugs out of circulation. We're also very mindful that we don't want to be seen to be in any way encouraging or condoning drug dealers, or providing a service that's a quality assurance of the illegal market.
Drug testing at festivals comes in the wake of a spate of drug-related deaths at various music events recently. Boomtown itself has had 4 fatalities in the last 6 years.
I'm standing here because Eleanor wanted to come to Boomtown, and I just want to raise awareness.
One of those was Ellie Rowe, an 18-year-old who was found unconscious in her tent after mixing alcohol and ketamine.
The unlikeliness of her death due to what she'd taken.
Her mum Wendy and sister Iona came to the festival for the 2nd year running to remember her.
The amounts that she'd taken wasn't a risk, and it was the double depression. It was purely the levels in her body at the time, and he said it was like she'd forgotten to breathe, and she'd laid back on her back, and that was how her cardiac arrest started.
I was sitting by the fire and the police car came in the gate, and he made me sit down and he told me, and everything changed. everything changed. And that's that.
But we were really just like the other half of my mind and my soul. And
Yeah, she was you were so close. We're all close
really
to her.
close.
Do you think parents are aware of people who go to festivals? Do you think that there's enough awareness and enough dialogue around young people and drugs?
I think they know it happens, but it's not their child.
Yes,
That's what I think.
because we've had
And it's
people.
always their child.
Yes, yes.
You know.
Well, it's my
Well,
child.
yeah.
The thing is, people would say to me, "Oh no, I don't worry about my child because I know they're far too sensible to take care of that."
But
Well, Eleanor was the most sensible person.
la-di-da-di.
So I think parents are deluded.
60,000 people went to this year's festival and over 1,000 different samples of drugs were tested, the highest number of any festival the Loop has worked at.
Personally, I don't do drugs, but to be able to have the opportunity to go, what have I actually got? And somebody can tell you how strong it is or if it's got other things cut with it, means that people could make a lot more informed decisions if they're going to take whatever they're taking.
So is this something you'd like to see brought in kind of more broadly across the UK?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. Because people are going to take drugs regardless, so I think it'd be a better idea to test it and give people peace of mind before they take the drugs.
Yeah.
Personally speaking, I don't take any drugs, but maybe in the past I did, so.
When you're at the campsite, you have a lot of people coming up and like sometimes offering you drugs, and I'm not really interested in that, but I'm pretty sure that what they're selling isn't what they say they're selling, and I'm worried that people could, pick up stuff that they don't know what it is.
Boomtown festivals still try to stop the drugs coming in, but concede they aren't able to keep them all out.
Drugs do get in. They can't stop them getting into prisons. As best we try, we can't stop them getting into festivals. So what we really wanted to do was actually taking a much more responsible, pragmatic and a much more kind of open and honest approach to it, because people do take drugs. They don't just take drugs at music festivals, they don't just take them at nightclubs, they take them at city centres, at home. It's a big issue in society.
So, with recent figures showing deaths from drugs increasing here, and little change to the amount of illegal substances consumed in England and Wales, is it time that more parts of society move towards putting the safety of drug users before punishment for consuming them?
Anya Pop reporting there. Well, joining me now are Steve Rolls, Senior Policy Analyst at Transform Drug Policy Foundation, and the journalist and author Peter Hitchens. Peter Hitchens first. Testing drugs at festivals, sensible idea, would save lives.
It would save more lives if the police and the courts enforced the law against possessing those drugs and people didn't take them in the first place.
You've got 11,000
drugs,
people in prison at the moment for drug offences.
You have not got really more than a tiny few people, and they're exceptional, in prison for possession of drugs. Since the 1970s, this country has abandoned any kind of effort to interdict possession of drugs. It's made a certain amount of showy attempt to interdict the supply, but it's done nothing about possession. As a result, possession and use has increased exponentially. The lie which is told repeatedly by the legalisers...
Let me put that point directly to Steve Ross. I'll come back to you.
He's going to talk about prohibition.
No, I'll come back to you. I want to put that point directly. The problem is it's too lenient a drugs policy.
Well, I mean, enforcement approaches have been tried with different levels of intensity all around the world. And what there isn't is any clear link between the intensity of enforcement and the level of use. And that's not a conclusion that just Transform has come to. This is a conclusion that the Home Office came to in their own evidence-based review, and as has World Health Organization reviews and many others. It seems that as a form of deterrence, it's very ineffective user-level enforcement, but what it does do is it actually encourages risky behaviours and makes drugs more dangerous and drives people away from the kinds of health services that can actually help them reduce the risks that they're exposed to.
I mean, £1.6 billion a year is spent tackling drug use.
Can I just make a point there that what Mr. Rollis has just said is incorrect. In both Japan and South Korea, enforcement is effective. These are democratic, law-governed, free countries. They enforce their laws against drug possession. Drug abuse is much smaller. The Home Office,
but what about Portugal? What about Portugal? Let me ask you, because we're trying to have a conversation. What about Portugal, where decriminalisation...
The Home Office report of which he speaks slid over Japan with a slightly racialist remark about how they had a different culture. We had a different culture in this country, and we enforced our drug laws before about 1967. They have a different culture because they enforce theirs. Portugal is hugely overstated.
Well, let me just explain about Portugal for people watching.
Okay.
Decriminalisation there has happened, and now drug-related deaths are what? Death rate is 3 per million citizens versus 45 per million citizens in Britain here. That suggests it works.
There's several problems with Portugal. First of all, what they did in 2001 was codify what was already happening. Secondly, there's no reliable statistics of drug use before they changed the law. Thirdly, a number of things have happened. Lifetime use of drugs has increased, petty crime theft has increased, murder increased immediately afterwards, and the number of people who die as a result of drugs is not by any means the only problem. The main threat from drugs in particularly the Western world now, it comes from marijuana, which is closely correlated with irreversible mental illness.
Come back to marijuana,
it's not death, but
if you could just take on what he said about Portugal and decriminalisation.
Well, I mean, Portugal has been, I think, by most objective reviews, a remarkable success. There hasn't been an explosion in use, problematic use, particularly injecting drug use, which is obviously the most risky type of drug use, has gone down. School-age drug use has gone down. So two key vulnerable groups, we've actually seen a reduction in use. There's been a reduction in the prison population, reduction in HIV transmissions, and a dramatic drop in drug deaths. And that's why it now has cross-party support, it has popular support, and their position has been broadly adopted and is now advocated by the World Health Organization, across the UN, and many others.
But you'll notice he hasn't addressed any of the points that I made. That the law was already extremely weak in Portugal. Actually, Portugal came late to the drug festival and doesn't have very high use of drugs compared with many Western European countries. There is no real evidence that it's benefited the country, and quite a lot that it's done considerable harm.
So let me put your point about marijuana to you now. Marijuana, particular strains of marijuana.
Let's call it cannabis.
OK, cannabis, skunk, cause mental health problems, potentially.
Well, I mean, I don't want to get into a debate about the extent of risk, but let's just say all drug use is risky and cannabis is no exception. So, but however risky...
So then why shouldn't the state want to curb its use?
Well, the state is perfectly free to want to curb use of any drug. The question is prohibition an effective way to do that, and does it reduce overall harm? Now, however risky a drug is, it's more risky when you hand control of it over to unregulated gangsters and street dealers. And cannabis is a good example where it has become more potent and more dangerous under prohibition.
That is a fallacy. When the campaign for cannabis legalisation at the moment, in the Proposition 64 in California, calls for advertising of cannabis.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Well, maybe you don't, but the people, the big billionaire money which is behind this, the particular lobby does agree with it and put it in Proposition 64 for a reason. If you look at cigarettes, for instance, a drug which is regulated as you wish cannabis to be, which is advertised and sold widely,
and used as halved in the last couple of decades.
It does, because you know what I'm going to say. It does enormously more damage than any illegal drug because it's able to advertise. It has access to high street shops. It has access to advertising.
Not anymore. And use is going down.
It will have if Proposition 64 is implemented.
Well, I don't agree with that. There are different.
I don't agree with it, but the billionaire campaign...
Well, there are different types of regulation.
Which is working for this, does agree with it.
There are different types of regulation, Peter, and I don't agree with every type of legal regulation. I think we need to learn the lessons from alcohol and tobacco and make sure that when cannabis is legalised and regulated and where that's happening, that we do it properly. And if you look at somewhere like Uruguay, they don't allow advertising, and that's one that we specifically worked on.
But let's come back to the point about testing.
Advertising is done at the rock festivals and by rock stars anyway.
OK, you've come back to rock festivals. Let's come back to testing, because that would save lives. Therefore, that would surely be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Only if it weren't a deliberate campaign to undermine the idea that the law should be obeyed.
It's just decriminalisation by the back door.
Absolutely, what this does is it gives the impression that the law isn't being enforced and doesn't matter. People who've purchased an illegal drug, which it is illegal to possess, then take it into other people who, with no intervention from the totally absent police force, then test this illegal poison to discover how poisonous it is.
This is a
mockery.
This isn't a monologue, it's a discussion.
The police have to balance their responsibility to enforce the law with their responsibility of care for the people they are looking after in the context of an event. The police are amongst the most enthusiastic advocates of these sorts of facilities, along with the local public health authorities and along with the event organisers, because they know that they work. And we've seen where these facilities have been introduced, the number of deaths and the number of critical emergency cases drops dramatically.
I'm afraid you're going to have to take this argument outside. Mr. Hitchens, you're going to have to take this argument outside. Hello, I'm trying to speak to you, Peter Hitchens.
I know you are.
Steve,
I'm trying to speak to your,
thank you very much for joining us.